Welcome to the Authentic Voice podcast. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Miss Jeanette Menter, who is the author of You're Not Crazy, You're Codependent, best-selling book on Amazon, written about 12 years ago, loved by many. And Jeanette is also a survivor of trauma herself. Jeanette, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Grace. It's such a pleasure.
Yeah, so you and I get to talk about your book today and your work, your authorship, and all sorts of things that I think will really resonate deeply with our listeners as well.
I hope so.
So, Jeanette, can you tell me a little bit about how you first started to explore your own childhood trauma?
Well, when you asked me that question previously, I was thinking about it, and I realized looking back that I was on a journey long before I knew I was on a journey. I was always, my entire childhood and way into adulthood, was living in a state of fear and anger, depression, anxiety, just a feeling of being detached, different than most people, numbed out. So, what I was really doing was I was on a journey to find me. And as I started doing that, of course, along the way, I developed all these phony personas, and I just basically became whatever I needed to be to survive the moment, to be accepted, to not be punished, not to be left out, all those things that make a person feel terrible. And so, in the process of doing that, I gathered so much information. And that's when I'll go into it later, but I realized after so much time and so much growth that what I had learned, there were a lot of people out there that needed this information. And this book it literally just came through me. It was an experience that I'm sure I'll never have again. Uh, it kind of happened in a time where I had so many stressors going on in my life. And in addition, I had taken some, I was offered to get trained up to be a volunteer counselor for this big church that I was going to at the time. And when I would talk with people, all of a sudden I just started realizing I know exactly what your problem is. You've got the same issues I have. They may look different, but it's the same stuff. And I know what's wrong with you, but you can't just spit that out there. It's a process. There's so much to it. And that's when I realized through all my journaling and all my knowledge and all my own experiences and what I was seeing out there, I needed to write a book. And that's how that happened.
Wow. Okay. So I know for many of us, we hear the word trauma and adulthood, and it sounds like something that happens to other people. And we tend to minimize it and say, oh, well, it wasn't that bad. So we all have kind
Mm.
of different experiences as to how we wake up to the fact that at some point in time we were traumatized.
Well, that's the thing. One of the things that traumatized people do is they minimize it. It wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse. I sure have done it. And I say this in my book. I mean, what I went through is nothing compared to what some people have gone through and continue to go through. It's absolutely, there's no comparison. But on the other hand, we all end up in the same place. We feel damaged, we feel unlovable, our guard is always up. We have all these tendencies and traits. We have the same things in common because of that background. There is no hierarchy of pain. Pain is pain, trauma is trauma. And I think it's Dr. Levine said, and I quote him a lot in my book, that all trauma is stressful, but not all stress is traumatic. And people who have been through trauma have way different issues than people who have just had some stress in their life. We all have stress in our life. That's what life is. You go through stressful times, you get over it, and you move on. But when you're raised with trauma, where you're never feeling safe, where you're always on guard, when you lose the ability to ask for what you need, and you eventually get to the point, as I did, where you don't know what you need, you don't know who you are, you're just a ghost. You're just performing for other people to survive. Those things leave a mark on you for a lifetime. And if you don't do the work, you're stuck living a life of a half a human. I
Yeah,
wouldn't recommend it.
that is really profound and insightful. And thank you for articulating that. I think in order for us to kind of open up our conversation to our listeners, I want to take some time to really define codependency. And my question is twofold. When we talk about codependency, because it's a word that gets floated around a lot these days, um, is codependency also something that just one person is doing? Or is codependency always a two-way street? So if you could
That's
define it and then tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's hard. And I do define it in the book. It's just kind of, it's a very elusive subject and label. Um, most times there is another party involved that starts this codependent behavior. The essence of codependency is, in order for me to be happy or be at all as a human being, I have to make sure that this other person approves of me. And a lot of times that means taking care of that person, which is where the codependent part comes in. If you're living with an addict, for instance, your job is to keep that person in drugs. If you're living with an alcoholic, you just, like my mother did, just keep him happy, shut him up, give him his alcohol, and everything will be fine. While she did everything else to kind of keep the world spinning for everybody else. That's highly codependent. My happiness depends on your happiness. That's the essence of codependency.
Okay. Thank you so much for defining that for us. And I want to talk about your book in depth because I think your book is fantastic. I thought it was very well written. The ideas are very well articulated.
Thank
Um, and I also felt like it was really approachable and digestible. And I think those things are not, as somebody who reads a lot of self-help books, those are the things that I get frustrated with that I really appreciated about your book.
thank you.
So yeah, absolutely. So I want to ask you, like, what led you to write your book, and when did you like have the idea, and then when did you decide to do it?
Okay, first of all, I just want to address the tone of the book. I make it clear on page 1 that I don't have letters after my name. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have a degree in this stuff. I'm just somebody that's lived through it. I happen to be able to write pretty well. I mean, I started writing when I was 16 for money. And writing is a passion of mine. My tone, I used to and still do very much, almost every day, listen to a woman called Joyce Meyer. And I love her because she's so down to earth. There's no pretense about her. And I found her in my head a lot. And I liked her tone because she is talking to me, not down to me. She's not preaching to me. She shared experiences that we all had as survivors of trauma. So I think I was channeling her a little bit because I have a tendency to be blunt and sharp tongued, maybe even. I don't like fooling around with words. I kind of get right to the point. And I appreciated that. And she gave me permission to go ahead and be that way in the book. And I've gotten a lot of positive response to that. So I think we all affect each other. And again, who you let into your head has a huge effect on the kind of person you are and the vibe you put out into the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so when did you kind of decide that a book needed to be written?
Well, as I alluded to, I was in, it was about, oh my goodness, a long time ago, but I was in the middle of a lot with our family. And I was doing a lot. You know, us codependent people, we tend to be overachievers because that way everybody will like us, right? And option is not failure is not an option. So you just keep going until you don't have anything left to give. And that's what I was doing. I was taking care of my mom who was getting dementia. I was taking care of a daughter. I was trying to take care of a daughter who had developed a drug problem at a very early age. I was doing a lot of different things that were highly stressful. And as I said, I was doing this counseling and seeing that there was a great need out there. And I was journaling a lot at the time. And I just felt like this book just came through me. I had to start writing. And when I started writing, all these books that I'd been collecting over the years, sitting on those shelves, had all the answers to all the questions that I wanted to answer in my book from people who did have degrees to give my own ideas validity. And I couldn't stop writing. And I know that I'll never have that experience again. It was a once in a lifetime thing for me.
Wonderful. And I know you and I talked a little bit about this in the pre-interview. So if you could tell our listeners a little bit about kind of how you started talking with other people about their emotional issues that were coming up.
I'm not a professional counselor, but I do coach some coaching here locally as it relates to codependency. And when people write letters or emails, or when they talk to me about specifically regarding codependency in my book, what I realize is we all have the same issue, no matter, it all looks different. And some people don't realize they have these issues until I start pulling back the layers of the onion and getting back to the source of where their issues come from. And then there's this aha moment. Whoa, oh my God, I never realized that what happened to me 30 years ago is affecting who I am today. To me, that's amazing that people don't make that connection, but that's because I've been living in the middle of it for so long. For most people, this this is new territory for them. They've just been busy trying to survive their life. And when somebody like me comes in and makes sense of it and turns a little light on and says, this is happening to you because that happened to you. You are this way because that happened to you, and nobody was there to help you. Nobody protected you, or this happened, or abuse happened, or all these horrible things that happen to people. It all creates codependency. And when you connect the dots like that, there's a little aha moment. And it makes me feel good when I can help people turn that little light on.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. So long before you were even an author and before you became a coach, which you are now, I know you had mentioned kind of starting to counsel people through your church.
Right.
So what was that like, and how did you start to connect the dots of this person is suffering from the same thing that I suffered through?
Okay. Well, it takes a few visits, and then you start hearing the same message. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm just depressed. And I don't know why I keep attracting the same kind of losers into my life. And oh, by the way, my parents did this and did that. And I experienced this trauma and that trauma. And this boyfriend did this to me. And um, so now I'm seeing a pattern, right? These people have gone through the same things that I went through, that all of us go through. It just looks different and everybody else's story. Everybody has their unique story. The thing that I am most concerned about is we got to stop this and make people aware of how they're living their lives, because codependency is like any other addiction, and you have to be mindful of it all the time, because there's always that temptation to fall into old thinking patterns. And I talk about mindfulness a lot in my book, because you have to be mindful of your thoughts, your words, your behavior. And all this is the reason that this is so important is because we will pass it on to our children. They may not say anything, but they're watching. And if you look at kids that are acting out and have behavior issues or suffer from depression, look at where they came from. And if that's all they see every day is violence and stress and the withholding of love, which, by the way, is a horrible form of punishment or trauma, abuse. And that's what happened to me. Nobody ever hit me, not at home. That came later. But the withholding of affection has a profound effect on people. So anyway, all these individuals would come in with their various issues, and it all came down to, well, you're codependent. And so the tumblers all fell in place, and I realized I need to put all this information together to help these people. And that church that I was going to at the time was wonderful, because they allowed me to put on a 6-week workshop based on the book. And I then went and started giving talks in the community and, started getting the word out.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful that you did have all that background experience, and work with all those people and start seeing all those patterns. I personally have been in therapy for the last 5 years, and there were very many points throughout your book where I was nodding as I was reading and feeling like, wow, after all of these healthcare professionals and running a trauma support group with 300 people, this woman has articulated some things that that really hit the nail on the head, and that are so relevant to the wounds that we have in common. And it really is one of those things where I feel like trauma recovery is like trying to get a piece of chewing gum off the bottom side of a table with a butter knife.
Oh,
You have to unstick it from every single angle. And I feel like the way that you talk about trauma um, addresses it from different angles and perspectives that have not yet been articulated.
thank you. That's powerful. I appreciate that. And the comment that I get most often about my book is, I feel like you were talking directly to me. And that's exactly the mood that I wanted to convey. These issues, codependency and trauma, abuse, the shaming that goes on in a child's life are so disturbing. We tend to hide it. And when you hear somebody just talking about it, instead of trying to analyze it, you can connect, you relate, like, yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
100%.
That's exactly what happened to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And um I really appreciate your insight on the withholding of love and
Mhm.
psychological isolation,
Mhm.
and nonverbal abuse,
Yep.
because that was me as a little girl. I grew up in a climate of fear, and I think I probably got a few spankings here and there, but I really wasn't physically punished or physically abused. But withholding of love was a very, very regular occurrence in my
Yep.
childhood. And it was just so painful, and it's so validating to hear you speak of that as
Yeah.
a really severe form of abuse.
Oh, it's terrible. You know why? I'm sure you do. You're smart. But in the moment, you don't realize that when they withhold, when a parent withholds affection, like my mom would just stop talking to me for 3 days. I had no idea why. That is the worst thing because a child is left not knowing what they did wrong. And the message is there's something wrong with you, but I'm not going to tell you what. You are unacceptable. You're a mess. We're ashamed of you. But, those words aren't spoken. It's just hanging out there for you to kind of figure out for yourself what is wrong with me? Why doesn't she love me? Why don't they show affection to me like they did to the other one? It's a terrible form of abuse. And it leaves a child feeling afraid to just be. You certainly, in dysfunctional homes, we don't talk about it and we don't feel. So I learned how to feel nothing except rage. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know who I was. I just knew that there was something wrong with me. And I knew I wanted to kill my father.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I want to talk about an important concept that you highlight in your book of the way that codependency is an addiction. And I
Yes.
read you have a whole section dedicated to addiction in the household and
Mm.
how those dynamics kind of come up and result in neglect and abuse in different forms.
Oh, yeah.
I resonated so much with the section on addiction, but
Mm-hmm.
we didn't have any substance abuse or anything like that in my household, but every single other thing that you were saying was like, yep, that happened, that happened, that happened. So I want to talk about the relationship between addiction and codependency. And then I also would like for you to explain why codependency becomes an addiction.
Codependency often, uh, I don't have a statistic, but more frequently than not, there is some sort of addictive behavior involved to where you have the addict who isn't capable or doesn't want to change, and the codependent who has to make sure that that addict's needs are taken care of so that there's peace in the house, so that there's no more violence, so that the kids can sleep, so that the neighbors won't talk, that kind of stuff, survival stuff. That's the core of addiction based codependency. Codependent behavior, then, which is now fully developed inside of this caretaker, can't go out into the world without having the same codependent mindset. And it's important to make sure that everybody likes you. It's important to make sure that nobody knows our secrets. We become very secretive. We hide, we fake, we lie, we do anything to keep the shroud of secrecy around our addiction, around our dysfunctional family. And that's a hard job. And usually the codependent person is exhausted all the time and not a lot of fun to be with because that person is taking on two roles, usually the role of the addict and the role of the caretaker, um, in terms of doing the job that the addict should be doing, whether it's going to work, whether it's taking care of the kids, whatever the addict's job is, the codependent or the caretaker has to do all of it. And that in itself results in a lot of dysfunctional thinking and a lot of bad behavior.
Mm. And so, as someone who has experienced and witnessed my own codependency and codependent uh,
Right.
tendencies.
It's awful, isn't it?
I feel like it's a little bit of it's kind of like a rubber band sort of situation. You try to stretch away from those patterns, and then sometimes you snap back into your default of seeking approval, people pleasing, wanting to make sure that everybody else is happy without any regards to your own happiness. So, what would you say to people who are kind of aware that they have some of those tendencies, who are working to improve upon themselves and have more balanced relationships?
I love your analogy of trying to get gum off the bottom of your shoe because when you start this work and you start, like I said, peeling the onion back, it just leads to more layers and more stuff comes up, and you realize that you have so many things you have to work on that it can be overwhelming. And this is why a lot of people just choose to stay broken and not do anything. It's hard. It's really hard. But for people like you and people like me and a lot of other people who've chosen to say, look, I got to have better. I cannot live another day feeling the way that I feel. I have got to have a real life. Um, the work is inspiring, it's challenging, it's so rewarding. And the biggest lesson that comes out of this, Grace, is that we learn how to forgive ourselves over and over and over again because look how long we've been living this way. Most of us have been this way throughout our adult lives.
Yeah.
And then to say, okay, I'm going to make the decision to heal, and now you have to go all the way back there where those people were and face that stuff. And then also, by the way, it requires facing yourself and being honest with the role you have in playing in your own unhappiness. It requires brutal honesty, and this is where you learn how to forgive yourself first. And I talk about this in my book. I'm a big believer in forgiveness. I think it's the only way to peace. But my belief is that you start by forgiving yourself. And only then will you have the strength to forgive other people.
Wow. So what I'm hearing you say is self-compassion and self-forgiveness is really the key to continuing to stretch that rubber band without just snapping back right into your
Yes, ma'am.
default.
That's it. You just got to keep going. And you know what happens with a rubber band when you keep stretching it? It gets bigger. So your capacity to handle things will get easier as long as you keep growing. It hurts. But then when you look back at the growth that you've had, you're going to wonder, how could I have let that go on so long? And you start seeing small changes in yourself. And you start, oh my God, liking yourself instead of just being filled with self loathing every day. And the day that you can say, this is who I am, oh well. And that's hard because we all identify a certain way. And we want to keep codependent people, want to keep that image perfect. And that was a hard one for me because I spent most of my career in some sort of sales or another, advertising or real estate. And so my appearance was everything to me. I thought it was, I thought it was important. And it was to some degree. It was back when dressing up and looking good and all that stuff really mattered. Um, so that became the foundation of who I was. You must be perfect. And that is the hardest thing for a codependent person is to realize you don't need to be perfect. You can't be perfect. And allowing yourself to just slowly emerge from all those unrealistic expectations of who we think we should be and have to be in order to be accepted out there in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you talk a fair bit about perfectionism in your book. And I really appreciated that. Kind of growing into this person who has to be perfect all the time, who puts lots of pressure and lots of expectation on themselves because that's who you had to be while you were experiencing your trauma, right? In order to survive,
Yes.
really kind of becoming this secondary persona that doesn't really belong to you. And then
Or 5 or 6 or 12. Yeah.
yeah. And for me personally, I mean, the last 5 years have just been all about self discovery and giving myself permission to really learn who I am really deep down as a person. Once I let go of that constant need for approval, and
It's a
that
hard one.
fear based need. Yeah.
It's a real hard one. I mean, who doesn't want to be approved of? Narcissists, I guess. And, that's a whole other subject. That's a buzzword these days. But it's true, codependent people are attracted to narcissists. But anyhow, this need that we feel we have to be perfect to be loved. We can't make mistakes. We have to be the best. Oftentimes, if you look at people who are very successful at what they do, they come from pretty traumatic backgrounds where perfection was required in order to um, fit in, be accepted, approved of. You have to stand out. You have to be better so that people will finally love you. That's the basis of it. So much of this is about just see me, see who I am, notice what I do, tell me that you approve of me and that you like me. It's this little child that's in all of us, this little child that is screaming for somebody to notice them and to say, hey, I love you, you're good, we appreciate you, you're needed, you're fine.
Mhm.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if we heard that when we were little children? But instead, as adults, we go through life with this little child inside of us who has not had his or her needs met all the way back there, and now goes through life making a just exhausting themselves trying to capture that. At one point, I had such bad adrenal burnout, I couldn't do anything. I remember laying in bed crying and just telling my 2 little girls, I'm sorry, I can't even make you dinner. I can't do anything. I have to stay in bed for a couple of weeks. I couldn't do a thing. And it was bad. And that, what kind of a parent can you be? What kind of a worker can you be, or a wife or a friend, if you don't have anything left to give? And this is very common for people who have no boundaries, which is another trait of the codependent person. No boundaries. Will do whatever it takes, just like me.
Mhm.
There's so many traits, there's so many uh, personality traits that emerge from this kind of a background, and none of them are healthy. This need for perfection, this need, no boundaries, being anxious all the time, controlling. You want to talk about controlling? I probably was the most controlling person in the room all the time, and it's not attractive. And letting go of being controlling is really hard. I don't know if you're that type, but I was, and I'm happy to say I'm not anymore. But again, it all came through self awareness, um, noticing my behavior and my choice of words, and taking that extra breath that I talk about a lot in my book, and either keep your mouth shut or choose to say the right thing, being self aware.
Mhm. Yeah. So, Jeanette, I want to ask you, how have things changed in your life since you have become an author and a coach, and you've really put this work at the forefront of how you interact with other people and help other people.
Great question. Well, for one thing, I've changed a lot. My book is sort of a reference point. I find myself reading it from time to time as a reminder. Oh, yeah, this is happening because you're doing that. And this is happening because that happened. And it's okay. It's normal. You just need to work on it a little bit more. But the thing that's changed the most is that I have been getting letters and emails from people all over the world telling me how this old book is opening their eyes, changing their life, giving them hope. And I don't know if you've ever heard the story about the starfish where there are millions of them on the beach and the person throws one back and the other person says, well, what's the difference? You know, you just only threw one back because they were all going to die. And the man said, well, it helped that one starfish. And that's sort of my motto. If my little book can help one starfish, then it was worth it. And I totally believe that everything that happened to me in my past has been used for good. And I've been rewarded over and over and over again with all the things that I didn't get as
Mm.
that little girl when I really needed it. I've got it in abundance now.
So that's
And
really interesting. I mean, it sounds a lot like when you released the need for approval and you put other things first, then now you have approval all over the place now that you no longer require it and you've been doing all these other things, right?
well, yes and no. I mean, yeah, that is a dimension. And by the way, I don't talk about my book to my friends for the most part. Maybe a couple people know, but I don't, it's not a topic that I bring up all the time. Oh, let me tell you what's going on. I don't do it. I feel protective of it. Um, but it is an incredible feeling to not be the person that I used to be. Um, there's a lot of things that have happened to me that I've been able to come to terms with. The biggest gift of all is just being able to finally forgive those people that did all that and realizing that they have no hold over me anymore and that I'm free. I release them and I release myself. I am free. And the mistakes that I make now, I do not blame and I cannot blame on anyone else. I have to take responsibility for my poor choices and the words that I say that I regret. Accountability is part of growing up and being mature. And none of it comes from, oh, poor me and my background, because that happened, I'm this way. And I'm not poo-pooing it because I lived my almost my whole life that way. And you have to until you get through it. First you have to understand the connection and then you work through it. And then eventually one day you start seeing sparks of the person you are really meant to be. And you like that person and you want to nurture that person and you realize, I am a good person. I don't have to be perfect. People like me, and if they don't like me, well, it doesn't feel good. I don't like it, but I'll be okay. I don't have to change who I am in order to make that person like me.
Yeah.
That's all part of growing.
Thank you for kind of telling us a little bit about the light at the end of the tunnel there, and the positive feelings and experiences that are on the other side of all of that darkness and kind of climbing the mountain of personal development.
Well, if I could just spend a minute and sometimes people need to know where you came from that you're able to talk about all this stuff with such authority, if you will. Um, my father was an alcoholic, and this is all in the book. I don't go into excruciating detail, but as I said in the book, if I don't tell you part of my story, why should you believe anything I have to say? I don't have a degree in it. And I've said I've had experience, but if I don't go into that experience, then how do you know to trust me with what I'm saying? My father was an alcoholic. My mother was highly controlling, very unhappy caretaker. And it was a very, for me, I can only speak about my experience, not my siblings, so I won't do that. But for me, it was a very unnurturing place. My father was not involved in my life at all, even though he was there, didn't show any interest in anything I did. And my mother was harsh and demanding, critical, and as I said, withheld love a lot. Um, and for all of you people with disabilities or things that you are sure are holding you back in your life, I'll tell you a little story very quickly. Do I have time?
Yeah.
I had a lisp my entire life, all the way up until my junior year of high school. I said my S's like this. I couldn't say my S's. And, in high school, it was bad enough earlier, but in high school, it was excruciating. And in my junior year, somebody whose name I remember but won't repeat called me out and just humiliated me. So I spent the summer between my junior year and my senior year standing in front of a mirror saying my S's. And it felt wrong. It looked wrong, but it sounded right. So by the time I got to high school, I entered the Voice of Democracy speech contest, and my plaque is hanging right over here. And I won first place, and I beat out the class valedictorian. That, to me, that was a lifetime achievement. That's why I carry it and place it wherever I live. So I was invited to give my speech at the VFW in front of all of these retired veterans. And my folks were supposed to come with me, and my father didn't show up, and he didn't ever give me a reason why. And to this day, that cuts me. And of course, we didn't talk about it. I didn't ask, and my mother didn't give me any information. So it was one of those things that happened with no discussion. But for me, because it was such an achievement on my part, and for him to just blow me off hurt. It's those little things. It doesn't have to be a brutal beating in order to leave a horrible scar on your soul, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that story with us.
Sure.
Um, Jeanette Menter is the author of You're Not Crazy, You're Codependent. I highly recommend you pick up a copy on Amazon or in print. It is a fabulous book. And Jeanette, you do also offer coaching in your local area. Is there anywhere else where people can find you or connect with you online?
I have a Facebook page, and if you type in the name of the book on Facebook, you'll be led right to it. But do I have time to just give a message to people who maybe are just now figuring out they need to do some work?
Yeah.
Um, the very first thing, the thing that comes up a lot when I talk with people is, oh, it's too overwhelming. I can't even make a decision that you're going to do the work of healing. Stay curious, read everything you can, learn about yourself, face yourself, and be honest. Be willing to look at your background, be willing to do the work of getting better. I know how hard it is. I feel like I've spent my whole life trying to get to this point. And you know what? I got to tell you, friends, it is so worth the journey. I cannot imagine being my age and living that kind of life where I was broken and numb and depressed and had no hopes and just resentment. I cannot imagine going through life that way. You are worth it. Do the work. There are miracles out there waiting for you, and you deserve it. Take that first step and just take an interest in your own future. And if you are in an abusive relationship, there are ways, it's beyond the scope of this interview to talk about it, but there are ways everywhere in order to get out of that. Take what you can, take your children if you need to, and get out. And if you are still around family members that are contributing to your pain, get away from them. Get away. I had to get on a one-way ticket on a train from the Midwest to the West Coast to get away from an abusive relationship. And that was the beginning of my healing journey. Even though I didn't know it then, I was too stressed out to even know it. Take that first step. I promise you, you'll be happy you did.
Thank you so much. Jeanette Menter, again, is the author of You're Not Crazy, You're Codependent. You can find her on her book Facebook page on Facebook. And it was a pleasure and a delight to have you today. Thank you so much for all of your time, energy, and insight today, Jeanette.
Well, thank you. And if people are interested in the book, it's on Amazon. Just go ahead and look it up. It comes in audio, paperback, Kindle, whatever you need. It's out there for you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.